ride him. And we'll own you for the horsewoman you give yourself out to be, or you'll hold your tongue about horses forever." The dare went round the stable-yard like a lit fuse, and every idle groom and every booted young gentleman in it turned to look at the maid it had been thrown at. Eliza Hart, upstairs chambermaid to the Duke of Ravensmere, who had no earthly business in the stable-yard at all, and who stood now with a basket of mending on her hip and the low July sun turning the loose hair at her temples to copper wire. She had only come down for the eggs. That was the whole of it. She had come down the kitchen passage with the warm smell of the hens still in the cool air of evening, meaning to be invisible the way she had taught herself to be invisible for 7 years, and she had paused one heartbeat too long at the rail of the great box where the black stallion stood. And a heartbeat was all the trap a careless tongue ever needed. "Leave the girl be, Mr. Aldous." That was Tomkin, the head lad, half laughing, half uneasy. She only stopped to look. She didn't only look. The young gentleman who had spoken, Aldous, one of Sir Hugo Crane's set, in a bottle-green coat that had cost more than Eliza earned in a year, pushed off the wall and came toward her, and the smell of him reached her first, hair pomade and claret and horse he had not himself groomed. She stood there and told Wicks the horse was frightened, not vicious, as though she'd chambermaid. So he swept a bow that was an insult folded into courtesy. "Ride him, sweetheart. Bareback, since you're so wise. There's not a man on this estate has stayed on him a minute, but you'll teach us all our business, I don't doubt." The stallion screamed. It came out of the box behind her, like something tearing, that high broken note, and the whole yard flinched as one animal. The geldings stamping along the line, a girth buckle ringing on stone, a pigeon clattering up off the gutter into the gold. Eliza did not flinch. She had heard that voice before. She had heard it the night it was born, in an April storm, with her father's lantern swinging, and the rain coming sideways through the door, and she had dried the wet new foal, with a twist of straw while it shook against her child's knees, and screamed exactly that note at the thunder. She set down her basket of mending. She did it slowly, because she already knew she was going to do the foolish thing, and a part of her stood off to the side and watched her do it with weary contempt. 7 years. 7 years of being no one, of grey skirts and a downcast face, and a name that was not her father's name, and it was all to be undone for a green coat's dare and the smell of an April storm gone sour in her chest. "What's the wager?" she heard herself say. Aldous laughed. "Wager? Your character, I should think. You'll be turned off for it within the hour. Then there's nothing of mine to win." She was already pulling the pins from her cuffs, already rolling the sleeves to her forearms where the muscles stood, lean and unservant-like, that she had spent 7 years keeping under wool. "And nothing of yours either, which makes it a poor sort of wager. 10 shislings, Mr. Aldous, if I stay on him to the gate and back, against your saying. Frightened, not vicious. In front of all these men, and meaning it." The yard had gone very quiet. Somewhere beyond the wall a thrush was running down its evening song. 3 notes, and a trill, 3 notes and a trill, sweet and ordinary, over the held breath of 40 people. Eliza walked to the box. She did not look at the stallion's rolling eye, or his laid flat ears, or the foam strung along the great muscled crest of his neck. She looked at the straw, and at her own 2 hands, and she began to talk. Low, level, a current of nothing words pitched under the men's hearing, the way her father had taught her at 5 years old with his rough palm over her small one on the lead. The bolt was cold and stiff under her fingers. The hinge sighed. She slipped inside and pulled the door to behind her, and shut herself in 800 weight of terror and dark, with the smell of him filling her whole head, hot horse, and bruised bedding, and the sweetish reek of his fear. And she kept talking. There now, my lad. I know that smell on you. That's only men, that's nothing." The colt swung his quarters to the wall and dropped his head at her, teeth bared, and she did not stop, and she did not hurry. She breathed out, long and slow, the way you teach a frightened thing to breathe by breathing it yourself. You don't want to bite me, you're only saying it. Andromeda's son doesn't bite the hand dried him in the straw. She laid her palm flat on the wet black shoulder, and felt the great heart going under it like a drum at the bottom of a well, and felt, slowly, over a count she did not rush, the drum begin to gentle. When she led him out into the gold light, there was no rope on him at all. A sound went through the yard that was not quite a word. She paid it no mind. She walked him to the mounting block in the center of the cobbles, and there she stopped, her hand flat on his neck, and for one moment the whole vast machinery of 7 years' caution seized in her and said, "Do not," said, "Stop now," said, "Let go the wager and be grey again and safe." And then the colt turned his head and lipped, very softly, at the hair over her ear, the foal's gesture, the one from the storm, and the caution went out of her like water out of a cracked jug. She took a fistful of black mane. She breathed, and she rose. One clean rise, no scrabble, her grey skirt spilling down his sleek sides like spilled ash, and she was up on the bare warm ridge of his back, with the muscle of him shifting alive between her knees. 800 weight of summer thunder gathered and waiting under her like a held breath, and the heath and the wall and the gaping faces all swung once and steadied, and she was, for the first time in 7 years, exactly and entirely herself. "Walk on," she said. He walked. He walked like a king going to be crowned, his neck arched and his hooves coming down, ringing on the cobbles, and Eliza sat the great roll of his stride with her spine soft and her hands quiet, and took him down the length of the yard to the gate, and turned him on the spot, light as a leaf turning, and brought him back. The thrush had stopped. There was only the ring of iron on stone, and the larks somewhere up and gone in the last of the light, and 40 people who had come to see a girl thrown, and were watching instead, a thing none of them would ever rightly be able to describe at any supper table for the rest of their lives. She brought him to the block and slid down and stood at his head with her cheek against his jaw, breathing hard, every nerve in her singing and appalled. 10 shillings, Mr. Aldous," she said when she could trust her voice, "and the word, if you're a man of yours." But Aldous was not looking at her. Aldous and Tomkin, and every groom and gentleman in that yard, was looking past her shoulder at the arch of the gateway, where a man stood in his shirt-sleeves with his coat over his arm, and the low sun full on his face, and had plainly been standing there long enough to have seen the whole of it. The Duke of Ravensmere said nothing at all. He looked at the quiet horse, and at the maid with her hand on its neck, and something moved across his still face that Eliza could not read, and did not try to, and then he turned without a word, and walked back toward the house through the long gold grass, and the trodden seed heads sprang up white behind his boots, and the spell broke, and the yard erupted. That was how it began. Not with the dare, and not even with the ride. It began with the silence of the man in the gateway, and the thing in it she could not read, and the cold, certain knowledge settling into her, even as the grooms crowded round her shouting that she had just thrown away 7 years of safety, in front of the one pair of eyes in all of England she had most needed to stay blind. She lay awake that night under the slope of the attic ceiling, in the narrow bed, with the ticking that smelled of old straw and her own lavender, water, and listened to the house go quiet below her floor by floor, and did her sums. She had £9 4 shillings put by in a stocking under the boards. She had a good plain box, and a shawl and 2 gowns. She had no character, and would have none now. A duke did not give a written character to a chambermaid, who climbed onto his stallion before half the county's idle young men. She would be turned off in the morning, and she would walk to the coaching inn at Marbury Cross, and she would take the grey road north, and become no one in some other house since some other county, as she had become no one here. And that, she told the dark, was the price of 1 minute's pride, and cheap at it, and she would not weep over a thing she had brought down on her own head. She did not weep. She lay with her eyes open and watched the square of grey where the dormer window was, and listened. Far off, faint, 3 floors down and across the yard. To the black stallion, calling once into the summer night, for the only voice that had ever come to him out of the dark, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her breastbone, hard as though she could press the sound out. And she did not get up, and she did not go to him, because going to him was the very thing that had ruined her, and a body could only be such a fool a finite number of times. The summons came at 6 with the chocolate tray, by way of Mrs. Pettifer. The housekeeper stood in the low doorway, in her mourning print with her keys at her waist, a square, stout woman who had been at Ravensmere since before the present Duke was breeched, and her shrewd old eyes went over Eliza's already packed box, corded and waiting at the foot of the bed, and her mouth pressed thin. "So," she said, "you've heard nothing, and you've judged the whole matter, and you've corded your box, all before the bells. That's a deal of certainty for a girl who's not yet been spoken to." "There's nothing to hear, Mrs. Pettifer." Eliza pinned her hair without a glass, her fingers steady from long practice. "I rode the master's horse for a wager in front of 40 people. I know what that's worth. I'd as soon save him the trouble of saying it and go quiet. Would you, Mrs. Pettifer set the tray down on the washstand with a small, deliberate click of china on wood. The smells of the chocolate came up between them, dark and bitter and impossibly rich, a smell from the world 3 floors below that never came up here. Then you'll be wanting to know that the master did not sleep, and was in the stable at 5, with a lantern, looking at that horse, as though he'd never seen the animal before, and that he said to me, these were his exact words, and I'll not improve them, 'Pettifer, send the girl down to the library after she's eaten, and mind she eats.' The housekeeper folded her hands. A man who means to turn a servant off does not first command that she be fed. I've buttered a deal of bread in this house for 40 years, my girl, and I know which side a thing is buttered on. Drink your chocolate, and uncord that box. It offends me." The library at Ravensmere ran the whole north front of the house, 2 stories of calf-bound silence going up into shadow, smelling of leather and old paper, and the cold ash of last night's fire, and the Duke of Ravensmere stood at the far window, with his back to the door, and the grey morning light, laid flat and chill across the floor between them. He did not turn when she came in. Eliza stopped just inside the door, her hands folded at her waist, her face arranged in the careful nothing she had worn for 7 years, and waited because the first move in any room belonged to the one with the power in it, and that had never once been her. "Where did you learn it?" he said to the window. "Your Grace?" "Don't." He turned then. He was younger than the county made him in its talk, not above 27, though he carried himself as though he were a deal older and tireder than that. A big man gone spare with worry, with a long, quiet face, and a thin white seam of an old scar across the back of the hand that hung at his side. "Don't." "Your Grace." Me with that voice. I heard it last night. Not the voice you're using now. The other one. The one you put on that horse. He came a few steps toward her across the cold light. "I have had 4 men handle that animal since he was a yearling. 2 of them were the best in the county, and 1 of them was the best in England. And they all told me the same thing, which was that he was unmanageable, and brain-sick, and best put behind a wall and forgotten, and that I had thrown away the last of my father's breeding on a brute that would kill a groom before he ever made a guinea. And last night a housemaid walked into his box with no rope, and brought him out, gentle as a lamb, and rode him bareback to the gate and back. So I will ask you once more, and you will not say, 'Your Grace,' to me, where did you learn it?" The 7 years' wall stood up in her, smooth and high and well-kept, and she opened her mouth to give him the smooth, high, well-kept lie. A kind master once, a farm in her girlhood, nothing, nowhere, no one, and then she made the mistake, the second mortal mistake in 2 days, of looking at his face. Because it was not the face of a man hunting a runaway servant's secret to use against her. It was the face of a man who had been told for years that a thing he loved was worthless, and had half believed it, and had stood at a gateway in the evening and seen it proved a lie, and had not slept since for the wanting to understand. "From my father," she said. The words were out before the wall could stop them, and once they were out the wall was no use any more, so she let the rest come too, level and quiet, watching his face the whole time. "My father broke horses for a great house when I was a girl. He was the best I ever saw or ever will. He taught me his whole art before I was 12, because he had no son, and I had the hands for it, he said, and the patience, and the right kind of nerve, which is the kind that doesn't show. And then there was trouble at the house, and he was turned off, and she steadied it. He didn't live long after, and I learned that a girl alone with a useful pair of hands and no character is safer if she asks no one in particular. So I became no one in particular. I've cleaned the grates of better houses than this for 7 years, and never touched a horse, and I'd have gone on doing it. Only your colt has his dam's voice, and I heard it through a door, and I'm a fool, and now you know, and you may turn me off, and I'll not say a word against it." The Duke was quiet a long moment. The fire was out, and the room was cold, and somewhere below a door closed, and a girl's voice called down a passage and was gone. "What was the house?" he asked. "Where your father served." And there it was. The question under the question, the trap she had spent 7 years walking wide around. And she felt the floor of the morning tilt very gently under her, because she could not tell him, not in this room, that the house had been this one, that her father was Thomas Hart, that the colt's dam, Andromeda, the mare whose loss had broken his own father, and mortgaged this very house to the rafters, had been foaled and gentled by the man this house had called a thief, and turned out to perish. She looked at the cold ash in the grate. "A northern house," she said. "It's gone now. The family's scattered. There's no one left to write you a character of me, if that's what you're asking, and I'll not blame you for wanting one. It was not a lie. Every word of it was true. It was only not the whole truth, and she watched him take it, and watched him decide. She could see the decision move over his face, the way you can see wind move over a field of standing barley, to let the unasked half of it lie unasked. For now, I am not going to turn you off," the Duke said. "Your Grace. I am going to do something far more scandalous than that, and you are going to let me, because we are both of us, this morning, past the point of caring what is said." He went to the long table and put his scarred hand flat on it, and looked at her down the length of the cold room. "I have a horse match against Sir Hugo Crane in 5 weeks. 1,000 guineas aside, his Lucifer against my best, run on the town heath before the whole county at the Lammas meeting. I made the match in the spring, when I still believed I had a horse to run. And a fortnight ago, my last hope of a rider told me to my face that the animal could not be ridden by any man living. 1,000 guineas, miss." He paused, and she felt the small space where her surname should have gone, and did not fill it, and he let that lie too. 1,000 guineas I do not have against a man who would like nothing better than to take this house out from under me by inches. I had given the match up for lost, and then last night a chambermaid rode my unrideable horse Bareback to the gate, and back as though they had done it together in another life. He straightened. "Train him. School him to a saddle and a course in 5 weeks, and ride him for me at the Lammas meeting, and I will pay you what I would have paid the best man in England, and a written character in my own hand besides, and you may take both and go north, and be no one for the rest of your days, if that is truly what you want. But I have seen what you are, Miss No One, and I do not think it is. The morning light had warmed a degree while he spoke. It lay gold now along the table's edge, and caught the dust turning in the cold air, and Eliza stood in the great hushed room where she had no business being, and felt the whole shape of her careful, invisible life come apart in her, hands like wet paper, and could not, for her life, make herself sorry. "You understand what you're asking," she said. "A duke, standing a serving girl on a stallion at a public match. They'll say things, Your Grace. About you and about me, and none of it kind. They have said unkind things about this house since before either of us was born," he said. "I find this morning that I am very tired of arranging my life around the things they say." And then, quietly, almost to himself, looking not at her but at the cold, dead grate, as though the words surprised him on their way out. "My father arranged his whole life around it. It did not save him. I have a horse that can run and a girl who can ride. And 5 weeks, and for once in the history of this melancholy house, I should like to win something. Will you ride for me or not?" And Eliza Hart, who had come down for the eggs, looked at the man who did not yet know whose daughter stood in his library, and said the word that would unmake them both, and remake them both, and could no more have stopped herself saying it than stopped the larks going up. "I'll ride for you," she said. "On my terms, and the horses, and no other man's hand on him but mine. Have the saddle, I tell you, sent down by noon, and tell your grooms to stay out of my yard before the sun's up. He's a different creature in the grey before the world starts shouting. So am I." They began the next morning before the light. She had told him the truth about the grey hour, and it proved truer than she had known. In the high gold of an afternoon, the colt was all surface, all fear and challenge, and the memory of men's hard hands. But in that pearl-coloured stillness before sunrise, with the dew soaking cold through her boots, and the meadow breathing up its smell of bruised clover and wet earth, with the larks not yet woken, and the whole world holding its breath at the bottom of the night, he came down out of himself and was only what he was, which was a frightened young thing who wanted, more than he wanted anything, to be told what to do by a voice he could trust. "Walk on," she would say, the long rein running soft through her fingers, the wet grass dragging at her hem, and he would walk. "Stand," and he would stand, blowing, his breath smoking in the cold, his ears swiveling back to her, like a creature, listening for the one sound that meant safety. She built it the way her father had built it in her, by inches, by patience, by never once asking a question she was not certain he could answer, so that he learned, slowly across those grey mornings, that her voice never set him a thing he could not do. It was the whole of the art, her father had said. Not breaking. Breaking is for fools and men in a hurry. You don't break a horse, Liza. You give it your nerve to borrow until it grows its own. The Duke came down to watch on the 4th morning, and she heard him before she saw him. The wet hush of his boots in the grass, the colt's head coming up, and she did not stop the work or turn round. "Stand at the rail," she said, "and be a fence post. He'll mind you if you're a fence post. He'll fret if you're a duke." He stood at the rail. He was, she would learn, a remarkably good fence post. He had the gift of stillness, which is rarer in great men than in any other kind, and the colt, after one long suspicious appraisal, decided to allow him into the edges of the world and forget him. And so the Duke of Ravensmere came down to the meadow morning after morning, in the cold before his household stirred, and leaned on the rail in his shirt-sleeves with his coat over the post, and watched a maid teach his horse to be brave, and said very little, and went away each day a fraction less like the spare, grey, tired man she had first seen in the gateway. It was on the 9th morning that he made his joke. She had been telling him about the colt's breeding, drawn out of her sideways by his quiet questions, careful all the while to keep her father's name out of it. How Andromeda's line carried the stamina in the 2nd mile, how you could see it in the way the colt found a second wind on the long pull of a rise where a sprinter would empty out. "It's all in the wind," she said. Crane's Lucifer will have the foot of us off the start, 4 lengths, easy. But a sprinter spends himself early, up the far rise where it pulls long. That's where a stair makes a sprinter feel the want of his wind. My father had a Latin tag for it, off some old poet. Possunt quia posse videntur. They can, because they think they can. The Duke translated, and then, after a moment, with the faintest dryness she had not yet heard in him, Virgil, though I'd a tutor at Oxford who'd have had your father's hide for the scansion, and mine for agreeing with it, and the horses for caring. I read Virgil for 6 years, and learned nothing from him but how to be flogged in Latin. You've had more good of one line of him in a wet field than I had of the whole Aeneid under a roof. He looked out across the grey meadow where the colt stood blowing. It seems a hard thing to discover at 27 that one's entire education would have been better spent in a stable. But there it is. I shall write to Oxford and demand my money back. They'll send it, I'm sure. They are very good about that sort of thing. It was a small thing. It was the smallest, driest thing. A tired man's joke against himself, gone almost before it landed. But Eliza, who had not once in 3 weeks seen this grave, careful man so much as smile, felt it go through her like a struck note, and turned her face away to hide that it had, and felt the corner of her own mouth pull traitor against her will, and the colt. Feeling the change in her, the small loosening of the body he read better than any man, blew softly down his nose and shook his great, black head as if he too had heard the joke and thought it a fair one. "There," said the Duke, watching her, "I have made the chambermaid laugh, and the stallion forgive me, both before sunrise. I shall do no better work today, and I may as well go in." But he did not go in. He stayed at the rail until the sun came up over the far rise and turned the wet grass to a field of struck sparks, and the larks went up all at once out of the meadow into the gold, climbing and singing, and Eliza stood in the rising light, with her hand on the warm neck of his horse, and thought, with a clear, cold dread that did her no good at all. Oh no, not this, anything but this. The Larksong Hill became theirs. That was how she came to think of it, though she would have cut out her tongue before she said the word aloud. Every grey morning they climbed it, first on the long rein, then under the light exercise saddle she had chosen, then, on the day the colt at last carried her up it at a steady working canter, without once thinking of the world, with the Duke walking up the slope behind on his own hack to time them. And at the top, every morning, the larks sat up out of the rough grass, as though the height of the hill were a thing they made together. She taught the colt the blind drop at the gravel pit on the back of the hill, where the ground fell away unseen, and a brave horse could save 2 lengths, and a frightened one would refuse and lose the race. She taught him to come back to her hand from a flat gallop, with no more than a word, and in the teaching she learned the man at the rail. Learned that his quietness was not coldness, but the long habit of a boy who had grown up in a house where feeling was a thing that ruined you. Learned that the scar on his hand came from pulling a groom out from under a falling cart horse at 16. Learned from what he would not say as much as from what he would, the whole sad shape of a great name worn thin over an empty strongbox, and a son who had spent his youth trying to be the opposite of a father he could not stop grieving. The cord she kept always in her pocket. It was an old thing, soft and dark, with years of handling. A plait of horsehair her father had made her when she was 6. A lead for your own horse, Liza, against the day you have one. And she had carried it through 7 years and a dozen houses as the one thing of his she had not been able to leave behind. She used it now to lead the colt up the hill in the half-dark, and the colt came to know it, would lip at the pocket where it lived, and it became, without her ever deciding it should, the truce flag between the 3 of them, the small, worn token of a thing that was being built every grey morning on the hill, and that none of them dared to name. It could not last. She had always known it could not last. She had built her whole life on the certainty that good things were borrowed, and the lender always came. The lender came in the last week of July, up the carriage drive in a barouche the colour of a wasp, in the person of Sir Hugo Crane. She was crossing the upper gallery with an armful of fresh-aired linen when she heard the wheels on the gravel and looked down through the long window, and the sight of the wasp-backed carriage stopped her where she stood, with her heart gone suddenly to slow, heavy strokes. She knew the Crane arms on the panel. She had known them her whole life. They were the arms of the family her father had been sold to ruin for, the family who had bought the mare Andromeda across a gaming table at midnight and let an honest man hang for it in all but the rope. She set the linen down on the gallery chest, and she went, not back to the servants' stair as she ought, but along the gallery to the small door that gave onto the music room, which lay beside the great drawing room, and shared with it a thin partition, wall and a habit in that old house of carrying every word. And she stood against the cold plaster in the dim, unused room with her hand pressed flat to the wall, and she listened. Because there are things a person cannot make herself walk past, and the sound of that name in this house was one of them. Crane's voice came through the wall like oil over water, beautiful and lazy and smiling. And so I thought I would come myself, Ravensmere, rather than send the lawyers, who are such grim company. We were boys together after all, or near enough. Now, the Lammer's match. A small chime of glass. He had helped himself to the Duke's brandy. I'll be frank with you, as one gentleman to another in a quiet difficulty. You can't win it. You haven't a rider, and the whole county knows you haven't a rider, and that poor brute of your father's is a byword from here to Newmarket. 1,000 guineas you have not got against my Lucifer, who has never been beaten. It's not a match, my dear fellow. It's a public hanging, and you've built the scaffold yourself. So I've come to be kind. A pause, soft as a falling glove. Sell me the horse, tonight privately at a fair figure. Withdraw from the match with your dignity, and while we're about it, let us settle the other matter, the one your father and mine drew up before either was cold. Augusta is willing. The settlements are drawn. Marry my cousin in the autumn. Let her fortune clear these melancholy mortgages of yours, and we are all of us friends. And no one need ever be hanged at all. The horse, the marriage, and your name kept whole. Come. You were always going to give me 2 of the 3. Give me the 3rd, and be comfortable. Eliza stood with her cheek against the cold wall, and waited to hear the Duke sell his horse and his future, and be comfortable. She told herself it was nothing to her. She told herself she was a rider hired for 5 weeks, and the rest was a Duke's affair, and a Duke's bride, and a Duke's debts, and none of it touched the Maid on the wrong side of a partition wall. No, the Duke said. Only the one word, level and quiet, and then nothing, and she heard Crane set down his glass. No, the lazy warmth had gone a half-degree cooler. To which part? To all of it. I'll run the match. I have a rider, and I'll not marry your cousin, Crane, for her fortune or yours or the King's. I told you so at Easter, and I tell you so now, and you may have the settlements back unsigned and welcome. Her chair legs scraped. The Duke had risen. You've had my answer. I'll bid you good day. There was a silence then that had a different quality, a stretched and dangerous quality, and into it Crane said, very softly, very pleasantly, the thing that turned the whole world over. A rider, yes. I have heard about your rider. The smile was all the way back in his voice now, and there was something terrible under it. A maidservant, they tell me, climbed onto the horse for a wager. Quite a tale. It's all over 3 counties already. I confess I made some inquiries, Ravensmere. Idle curiosity, you understand. A man likes to know who he's racing against. And do you know the oddest thing? The girl's name. Hart. Eliza's whole body had gone to ice against the wall. Eliza Hart. Now where, I asked myself, have I heard the name Hart, in connection with this house and a horse? A long, luxurious pause. I'll leave you to think on it, my dear fellow. I'm sure it will come to you. And when it does, when you understand whose daughter you've been schooling your father's last horse with, before the whole laughing county, you'll find my offer still open, and your dignity still purchasable. And the figure, I'm afraid, considerably lower. Good day. Don't trouble your man, I know the way out. The wheels went away down the drive a long while later. Eliza did not hear them. She had got herself somehow out of the music room and up the back stair and into the cold sanctuary of the stable, and she stood with her forehead against the colt's warm neck, and her father's cord crushed in her fist and shook, because the lender had come and the borrowed thing was called in. And it was worse than she had let herself imagine in 7 years of imagining it. For now the Duke would learn, whose hands had been on his horse, whose daughter had laughed at his Latin on the hill, and he would understand that the maid he had begun, God help them both, to look at the way he looked at her, was the get of the man his own father had ruined to cover a midnight theft, and the whole bright impossible thing they had not dared to name would curdle in an afternoon into a duke's worst humiliation. She thought of running. Her box was uncorded, but it would take 5 minutes to cord it. She got as far as the stable door with the grey evening beyond it, and the long, safe road, and she stopped because the colt called after her, once that broken note, the foal in the storm, and because she found she could not go without telling the Duke herself. He would hear it from Crane, oiled and barbed, made to wound the most, or he would hear it from her, plain. She owed him the plain telling. She owed her father that much, too, that his name be spoken in this house at last, by the one person living who knew it for an honest one. She found him in the library at dusk, alone, a single candle lit, and the brandy Crane had drunk from still standing on the table, and he looked up at her with such open and unguarded gladness at her coming in that it nearly broke her resolve to undo it. "I'm Thomas Hart's daughter," she said from the doorway, before he could speak. "The horsemaster your grandfather had. No, the one your father turned off for a thief, the year the mare Andromeda was lost. That was my father. He bred her. He foaled this colt's dam in this very yard. And he was put out of this house with no character and called a thief before the county, and he didn't long survive the shame of it. And I have lied to you by halves since the morning in this room, because I was afraid of exactly the look. That's coming onto your face now. There. Now you know the whole of it. Crane knows it too. He came to tell you, and to gloat, and to drop his price. I'll be gone by morning, and you may run some other horse or none, and I'm sorry, your grace. For the lie. Not for the riding, never for the riding. But for the lie I'm sorry to my bones." The candle guttered in the draught of the closing dusk. The Duke had risen at her first words and stood now very still, his scarred hand flat on the table, his long face white, and what came onto it was not the disgust she had braced against, nor the cold withdrawal of a great name closing its ranks. What came onto it was something far harder for her to bear, because she had no defense prepared against it. It was grief, and it was shame, and it was not for her at all. "Thomas Hart," he said low. "Thomas Hart taught you on the hill before you were 12. He put his hand over his eyes a moment. I was scarce a man grown when they turned him off, though I knew him well from my boyhood. I remember him. I remember a tall, quiet man who let me sit on the wall and watch, and once lifted me up onto a grey pony and walked me round the yard while my father was from home and told me, I had forgotten this until this exact moment, told me, 'Gentle hands, young master, a horse forgives a hard word, but never a hard hand.' And then one morning he was gone, and the word in the house was thief, and the mare was gone with him. They said, and I was young and full of the house's certainties, and I believed it, and I have believed it ever since." He took his hand from his eyes. "Sit down, Miss Hart. No, sit down. I am not going to turn you off. Will you, for God's sakes, stop trying to leave this house? Every conversation we have you spend looking at the door. Sit down. There is something in this room you had better see, and then you may tell me how much of your father's ruin I have been a party to without knowing it, and we will neither of us, I think, sleep tonight." She sat. He went to the great desk and unlocked a drawer with a key from his watch chain and took out a paper. Old, foxed, soft at the folds, with long handling, and stood holding it a moment, as though it weighed more than paper could. "I found this when I buried my father 3 years ago, going through his private papers for the lawyers. I have carried it since and shown it to no one, because I am a coward, and because publishing it would blacken a name I was raised to keep whole, above all earthly things." He held it out to her across the candlelight. "It is in his own hand. Read it, and then tell me your father's Christian name again, and let us see how cruel the world has been while I kept silent, to spare a man already in his grave the disgrace he'd earned." Eliza took the paper in fingers that would not quite hold steady. The old ink had gone brown. The hand was crabbed and high and certain, the hand of a man used to being obeyed, and the date at its head was 3 days before the morning her father was turned out of his life. "The grey mare goes to Crane tonight to clear the Newmarket book." She read, the candle flame swimming, "And the matter is to be laid at Hart's door, for I'll not have it whispered that a Ravensmere gamed away the best blood in England. See the man dismissed without a character, and the story put about that he sold her and pocketed the gold. He's an honest fellow and will protest, but no one heeds a groom against a duke. Be quick and be quiet." She read it twice. She read it a third time, while the great cold room and the single candle and the man watching her swam and steadied and swam again, and then she set it down very gently on the table, as though it might break, this scrap of paper that was the truth she had carried her whole life like a stone under her tongue, and never once been able to prove, and she pressed both her hands flat upon it, and she found she could not speak at all. "Thomas," she managed at last. "His name was Thomas. He died. He was gone within the 2 years, and he never once stopped saying he was no thief, and they buried him in the corner of Marbury churchyard, where they put the ones the parish isn't sure of, and I was 19, and there was no one to speak for him, and I learned to make myself small so the same thing could never come for me." She lifted her face. "And you've had the proof of him these 3 years, in a drawer, while I scrubbed grates in your own house and never knew it was here." "Yes," the Duke said. The word came out of him like something torn. "Yes, I have. And I have told myself 100 fine reasons for the silence. My father's memory, the family name, the mortgages that the scandal would have called in all at once. They were all of them true, and they were none of them the reason. The reason was that I am a coward, who was taught from the cradle that a Ravensmere does not air his shame, and I have let an honest man lie disgraced in unhallowed ground for 3 years, rather than say one hard, true thing aloud, in front of people who would think the less of me for it." He looked at the paper under her hands. "I cannot give your father back his years, but by God, Eliza Hart, I can give him back his name, and I will, and I'll do it where the wrong was done. Before the whole county, at the match. Let Crane stand there. Let them all stand there. We will win the race, and then I will read out my father's own hand to every soul on that heath, and your father will be an honest man again in the eyes of the world that broke him. And Crane will have bought a stolen mare for nothing, and the truth will be out, and I will be." He stopped, and something that was almost a smile, terrible and free, moved over his white face. "I will be, for the first time in my life, not silent. And we shall both of us find out together whether the sky falls when a Ravensmere tells the truth in public. I rather suspect it doesn't. I suspect it only feels as though it will." Eliza sat with her hands on her father's vindication and looked at the man who was offering, with no thought of what it would cost his own name, to give her back the only thing she had ever truly wanted, and never once dared hope for, and felt the last stone of her 7 years' wall shift in its bed. and understood, too clearly, too late to do anything sensible about it. That she had stopped being able to keep herself safe from him somewhere on a hill in the lark song, and that whatever the heath held 5 days hence, she was already lost. "Then we'd best win it," she said, and her voice was not steady at all, and she let it not be, hadn't we? The storm came on the third night before the match, and it came the way her father had always said the worst ones came, with no warning at all. A still hot dusk, the midges hanging in the last gold over the paddock, the smell of bruised clover heavy as a hand on the air, and then the light going a strange sick green over the far rise, and then between one breath and the next, the whole sky coming down at once. She was up the attic stairs and 3 floors below the colt, when the first great clap of it broke directly overhead, and she was on her feet before she was awake, because under the thunder, faint and far and unmistakable, came the high broken scream of Corsair in the box, the foal's note, the storm note, the sound that had reached up through 3 floors of stone and 7 years of caution, and pulled her down a hill once already. She did not stop for boots. She went down the back stairs in her shift and shawl with her bare feet, slapping the cold stone, and out across the yard into the white roar of it, the rain a solid sheet, the cobbles running like a stream, the lightning printing, the whole world black and white and gone, and the colt screaming, pulling her on through it like a rope round her chest. He was rearing in the box, plunging, the whites of his eyes showing all round, his front legs striking the boards, and there was already a long, ugly graze, opened down one cannon bone where he had caught it on the manger, the dark welling and washing pink down his wet leg, and 2 grooms outside the door with a lantern and a rope, and no more courage than sense between them, shouting to one another over the thunder about getting a twitch on him, about ropes, about waiting for it to pass. "Get back," Eliza said, and they got back, because there are voices that men obey without deciding to, and she had found her somewhere on the hill in the grey mornings. "Take the lantern off, take it. Away. He's seeing the shadows jump. Get back to the wall, all of you, and be silent." And she went into him with no rope, in a storm, in her wet shift, exactly as Aldous had once dared her to, and as no sane creature alive would have done, and she shut the door behind her, into the dark and the terror and the smell of hot frightened horse and wet hair, and the iron tang off his grazed leg, and she began to talk. That was where the Duke found her, when he came down through the storm in his nightshirt, with his own hair plastered flat and the rain running off his jaw, found the grooms pressed white-faced to the far wall, and the lantern dark, and his maddened, unridable stallion, standing in the black box, with his head dropped over the shoulder of a soaked and shaking girl, who had her arms round his neck and her cheek against his streaming jaw, and was singing to him, low, some wordless nothing tune, while the thunder walked away across the hills, and the rain on the roof gentled from a roar to a rush, to a long, soft, falling hush. "Bring me the lantern now," she said into the quiet, not turning. "Slow. And clean linen, and the brandy from the master's room, and then send them all to bed." And the Duke of Ravensmere stood in the doorway in his soaked nightshirt, with the storm running off him, and looked at the girl and the gentled horse and the grazed leg, and said, low, to the 2 grooms by the wall, "You heard her. The linen, the brandy, and then to your beds, every one of you, and you'll none of you speak in the morning of what you saw here tonight." He came in at last, slow and careful, the way she had taught him to come into the box, and crouched at the grazed leg in his wet shirt, and ran his scarred hand down it, feeling the bone hole under the torn skin, and let out a breath that shook. "Hole," he said. "By God. Hole, you went into him with no rope, in a storm. He could have struck you down." He wasn't going to strike me down. Her teeth had begun to chatter, now that it was over. She had not felt the cold until this moment, and now she felt nothing else. "He knows my voice. He knows your voice." The Duke rose. and took the shawl that had slipped to her elbows and drew it close round her shoulders with both his hands, and held it there, and the grooms were gone now, and it was only the two of them, and the breathing horse and the dripping eaves. A horse 7 years out of the box he was foaled in knows your voice well enough to come down out of a thunder fit for it. There is a great deal you have not told me, Eliza. His thumbs moved on her shoulders through the wet wool. And I find tonight that I no longer want to wait for the match to hear the rest of it. Your Grace. Gabriel. He said it low, almost rough, once. Here, where no one can hear it, with the storm gone over, and the horse standing, and no one in all the world but us two and him. Say it once, and then you may go back to Your Grace. For as long as you like, and I'll bear it. I have wanted to hear you say it since the morning you laughed at me about Virgil, and tried to hide that you'd laughed, the colt sighed. The last of the thunder muttered far off behind the hills, and Eliza, soaked and shaking, her bare feet numb on the wet straw, her whole careful armoured life washed off her by the storm like dust off the gravel, lifted her face and said, Gabriel, and the Duke of Ravensmere made a low sound in his throat, and bent his head and kissed her, not the gentleman's dry kiss to the back of a wrist, but a true one, slow and unhurried and aching, his scarred hand coming up warm to cradle her cold jaw, the dark and the rain smell, and the great breathing horse closing over the two of them, and she kissed him back. Fool and thief's daughter, and upstairs chambermaid that she was, because she had stopped being able to help it somewhere, on a hill in the lark song, and because the morning would come soon enough with all its thorns. And this, just this, here in the rinse dark with the storm gone over, was hers. The morning did come, and it was for one stolen day kind. She woke late, with the storm washed clean out of the sky, and the whole world rinsed and dripping and sparkling. The wet gravel steaming gently in the early sun, the smell of soaked clover and washed stone coming up sweet through the dormer. And when she came down at last to the stable, he was already there, sitting on the corn bin with 2 cups of chocolate cooling beside him. Both got warm by stealth from Mrs. Pettifer's kitchen, and the look he turned on her when she came through the door was so full and so undefended that she had to laugh at him to keep from coming entirely undone. A duke, she said, carrying chocolate to a chambermaid in a stable. Lady Carberry would take to her bed for a week. Lady Carberry is at her toilette until noon, and her maid has been bribed to silence with a half-crown and a promise of more. He handed her a cup. The china was warm through her fingers, the smell of it dark and bitter and impossibly rich. Drink it. You earned it twice over last night, and once again this morning by being alive. His leg has filled overnight, but he goes sound. I walked him out myself at 6, and he is cross and well and tried to take my ear off, which I take, on your authority, as a sign of robust returning health. He watched her drink, his chin on his fist, the morning light warming the spare grey tiredness out of his face by degrees. I have been sitting here the better part of an hour, Eliza, deciding that I do not, in fact, care in the least what your name was before it was Hart, nor what my father did, nor what Crane thinks he holds over me, nor what the whole county will say when a duke stands a thief's daughter on a stallion at a public match and reads his own father's shame aloud after. I decided it about the time the horse tried to remove my ear. Life is too short and too strange, and I have spent far too much of mine afraid of the wrong things entirely. After the match, Eliza, you and I will sort the rest of the shouting world out between us at our leisure, and let it complain. You make it sound a simple thing, Your Grace. Gabriel, Gabriel. She could not keep the warmth out of it, and did not greatly try. You make it sound a simple thing. It is the simplest thing I have ever known in my life, he said. And the only difficulty in it is that I'm obliged to win a horse race in 2 days to be permitted to have it, and worse, that I must win it by sitting on a rail and watching. You. Win it for me, which galls my pride past all describing, and which I find this morning, I do not care about either." He grinned at her then, a true grin, boyish, the years gone off him all at once, and it came to her, watching him, that this was the face he must have worn before the strong-box was found empty in the mornings, the man his father's ruin had stolen out of him at 20. Come back for an hour in the steam off the wet gravel. "When the stud is full again," he said, "I'll stand this colt to your choosing and no other soul's, and you shall pick his mares, and we'll make a line out of him to put my grandfathers to shame, and when they ask in the sail ring where the bay colt's dam was schooled, I shall tell them. A girl rode her bareback in front of 40 fools the summer I came to my senses, and watched their faces fall in." "You're talking a great deal of poetry," she said. "Over a horse that tried to take your ear off not an hour since," and he laughed aloud, the sound of it ringing off the stone, and reached over and tucked the loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture that was theirs now, made on a hill in the grey. And she leaned the side of her face into his warm, scarred palm for a moment, just one, and let herself, just this once, believe the whole of it. The full stud, the chosen mares, the wide-kind future, the man and the horse and the morning. Then she set down the cup and went to the colt, because the believing of it hurt too much to hold for long, and the holding of it frightened her worse than any storm. She should have known. Such mornings are the toll the road exacts in advance. He sold the horse to Crane that same night, and bound himself to silence, and broke her, and she did not understand until far too late why. It came at her sideways, the way the worst things always do. She was carrying the supper things down the long gallery when she heard Sir Hugo's soft voice through the library door, and the Duke's under it, low and clipped and strange, and her own name in Crane's smiling mouth, and she stopped with the cold tray in her hands, and she listened. Because there are moments a person cannot make herself walk past, and she had already learned in this house what waited on the wrong side of its doors. "The thief's daughter, Ravensmere," Crane was saying, gentle as oiled silk. "Eliza Hart, I have it from the parish register, I have it past all doubt. And so by noon tomorrow will every soul on the heath. Picture the scene for me. The Duke of Ravensmere, mortgaged to the chin, sets the daughter of the very man who robbed his own father onto the last of the stolen mare's line, before the whole assembled county. It isn't a scandal, my dear fellow, it's a farce. They'll laugh you out of England. That name of yours, the one thing you've been so very tender of your whole grey life, finished, in an afternoon, by a chambermaid you couldn't keep your hands off. A pause, soft as a glove dropped on a carpet, unless. Withdraw the horse. Sell me the colt tonight. Privately, at the figure I first named in the spring, take Augusta and her fortune with him as our fathers arranged, and I will see to it that the girl's name never crosses a single lip from here to the coast. I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm offering you your dignity entire. All it costs is the horse, the marriage, and the girl, and you were always going to give me 2 of the 3. Give me the 3rd and sleep easy." The silence behind the door went on a long, long time. Eliza stood in the dark gallery with the tray cold against her ribs and her heart going slow and huge, and could not draw breath. "Have the papers drawn," the Duke said at last. His voice was level, flat as slate. The voice of the first cold evening in the gateway, the voice from before the hill. "I'll sign in the morning. The colt is yours, and you'll keep her name out of every mouth in 3 counties, Crane, on whatever rag of your honor you've got left. Or I'll find what little of mine remains, and spend the last of it grinding you to powder. That I promise you." "On my honor," Sir Hugo said, and she could hear the smile widening in it. "What a very great deal of feeling, Ravensmere. Over a horse." She did not stay to hear the rest. She walked back up the gallery on legs that did not feel her, and set the tray down somewhere along the way, and got herself out into the cold dark of the stable, and stood with her forehead pressed hard against the colt's warm black neck, and the thing she had spent 7 years not letting herself feel came up and over her at last like the grey sea over a sea-wall. He had chosen the horse and the marriage and his name, she told the breathing dark, and he had let me go to keep all three. And he had done it the very same day, between the chocolate and the supper bell. The cup warm in her hands in the steam off the gravel, the kiss in the storm, the easy poetry of the full stud and the chosen mares. It had been the last amusement of a man diverting himself in the days before he did the thing he had always, in the end, meant to do, which was the thing his whole world required of him. He had never seen me at all, she thought, pressing the worn cord to her mouth. He had seen a useful pair of hands, and a face that made the long summer bearable, and when Crane named the price of me, he set me on the scale against the horse, and the gold and the name, and I came up wanting, as I have always come up wanting since the night they emptied the box and called my father a thief and turned the two of us out to perish. The wall she had built for 7 years to keep from being seen and weighed and found short had been the one true thing about her after all. She should never have let him past it. She had let him past it. And he had looked at the whole of what lay behind it, and turned, and sold it for a horse trade in a library. She would go before the signing. Before the match, before the whole laughing county had her father's name to chew. She would take her box and her wages, and the character she would never now be given, and she would go back into the grey where it was safe, where no one could set her on a scale, and she would not, after this, be such a fool as to climb onto a horse in front of any living soul ever again. The colt turned his great head in the dark and lipped at her hair. "Not you," she whispered to him. "I'm not angry at you, my lad. You never once sold me for anything." She stood with him until the cold of the cobbles came up through her bare feet into her bones, and then she went up to cord her box, the heavy lavender smell of the still-room passages following her up the dark stair. Mrs. Pettifer found her at first light, the corded box at her feet, standing in the scullery's passage, under the bunches of lavender, hung bone-dry and fragrant from the beams. "And where, pray, do you imagine you are going?" The housekeeper said. "Not 2 hours before the grandest match this county has seen in 20 years, with the whole house at 6s and 7s, and the master not slept again, and that horse refusing his corn and calling the yard down. Away, Mrs. Pettifer." Eliza's voice was steady. Everything about her was steady. She had spent the whole night making it so, stitch by stitch, the way you mend a thing that must hold. "He's sold the colt to Sir Hugo. There'll be no ride. There's nothing left here for me now, but a name I can't afford to have said aloud. And I'll thank you for all your kindness to me, and I'll write to you when I'm settled somewhere quiet." "Sold thee?" Mrs. Pettifer stopped short. Her shrewd old face worked, the keys at her waist going still. "Now you listen to me, my girl, for I've been in this house since before that man was breeched, and I know the sound of his lies, and I'm fast coming to know the sound of yours, and the pair of you are lying to the very rafters this morning." He sat up in that library till gone 3, with the lamp burning down to the socket. I carried him his chocolate myself at 6, and found him with a paper before him unsigned, and a face on him like a man at the foot of the scaffold, and he said to me, these were his words, and I'll not improve them. "Pettifer, if I do a hard thing today to spare a great many people a great deal of harm, will you tell the girl, after, that there was no other road I could find?" The housekeeper took Eliza's cold hands into her 2 warm, dry ones, and gripped them hard. "Now I'm too old and too plain to riddle it out, and I'll not pretend to. But a man does not wear that face over a horse trade he is glad to be making. There's a deal more under this than ever you heard through a door, child. There is always more under a thing than a body hears through a door. Doors are the worst liars in any great house, and I've heard a lifetime of lies told on both sides of this one's." "It doesn't signify what's under it," Eliza said, and her steadiness cracked. just at the edge, just for one breath, and she pressed it shut again. He weighed me, Mrs. Pettifer, against the horse and the money. That's the whole of it, however gently and however sorrowfully he did it. And I've been weighed against money once already in my life by his own father, and found wanting, and I'll not stay in this house to have the son finish the lesson the father started. She picked up the box. The cord bit into her palm. Goodbye, and tell the colt. Her voice failed her entirely. She set her jaw and got it back and made it hold. Tell the colt he was the best of all of you. Tell him I said so. And she would have gone. She had her hand on the cold iron latch of the yard door, the grey wet morning beyond it, and the long, safe, invisible road stretching north out of all this. But it was the colt that stopped her. For through the door, ringing out over the waking house, came the high, broken scream of Corsair from the stable across the yard, the very voice that had brought her down 3 floors in the storm, and under it, faint, a man's shout, and the splintering crash of a body flung hard into the boards. They had a strange groom on him now, to lead him out to the match, and he would not have it. Eliza set down her box. He'll do himself an injury, she said, or someone. He'll have that leg open to the bone again. And the 7 years of grey hard-won wisdom went out of her one final time. Not for the Duke, not for any promise made or broken, but for the horse. For the foal she had dried with a twist of straw in an April storm, while her father held the lantern in the rain, and she caught up her skirts and she ran. The town heath was black with people by 10 o'clock. The carriages stood drawn up in their hundreds along the ropes, the booths bawled cordial and gingerbread, and hot pies into the warm air. The bookmakers shouted the lengthening odds, and the whole county had come out under a high, hard blue summer sky to see the famous Lucifer humble the Duke of Ravensmere and carry off the last of a ruined man's line. The word had run round, exactly as Crane had promised it would. She caught it in scraps as she pushed through the crush toward the saddling enclosure, the colt's lead rope cutting her palm. A maid, they're saying. The thief's own daughter on the stolen horse. Ravensmere's gone clean out of his wits. It'll be a farce, you mark me. They had come for the farce. They were to get something else entirely. She would not let the strange grooms near him at the start, and the Duke, white to the very lips, finding her there in the enclosure when he had thought her halfway to the coach road, finding the colt standing quiet and sound under her hand. The Duke understood the whole of it in a single look. That the signing had not held, that the horse had refused every hand but hers, and brought her back through 10,000 people for his sake, that the match was on after all, and his own desperate hard bargain undone by an animal that loved a serving girl. A terrible hope broke open across his white face, and she would not look at it, because she had not forgiven him, and did not mean to, and was here for the horse alone, and meant him to know it. Billy, don't. She said it low and even, not looking at him, drawing up the light pad on the colt's back. The soft snaffle, no more leather than she needed. I'm not here for you. I heard you last night, through the library door. I heard the whole of it, the horse, the marriage, the price. I'm doing this for him because he'll go for no one else living, and because Crane shan't have him while there's breath in my body to stop it. After the post's run, I'm gone. You'll write me my character as you promised, and we'll be quit. And you may marry your Augusta and clear your mortgages, and keep your good grey name. Now hold his head and be quiet, the way I taught you on the hill, and let me ride. She saw the words go into him. She saw him understand that she had heard only the half of it through that door, and taken the half for the whole, saw him open his mouth to tell her the rest. And then the bell rang for the riders to mount, and Sir Hugo's Lucifer was led out to the start, a magnificent dark bay devil with a professional jockey crouched high in Crane's bottle-green silks, and there was no time left for anything in the world but the running of the race. Eliza vaulted up onto the colt's bare back before 10,000 people exactly as She had once vaulted up before 40, one clean rise, her grey skirts spilling down his black sides like ash, and a great roar went up off the heath, derision and delight and flat disbelief, all braided into one wall of sound, and she did not hear it, because she had already gone to the still place her father had taught her. The place where there is only the horse, and the going, and the long green miles. She gathered the rein. She felt Corsair come up alive under her. All his old terror turned at last to fire, all the storm he had been named for, gathered and ready in his great body. "There you are, my lad," she said, for him alone, her hand flat once on the warm crest of his neck. "There you are, let's go home." The flag dropped. Lucifer went away from the start like a stone from a sling, the sprinter, the certainty, 4 clear lengths up before the colt had so much as found his stride, the bottle-green silks, flat and small over his neck, and the crowd roared for the route it had paid to see. Eliza did not chase him. She sat still and low, and let the colt find his own long rolling rhythm, the springy heath turf flowing away under them, the gravel pit swinging up on the right where she had taught him the blind drop in the grey mornings, and she took the inside of it close and clean, while Lucifer's jockey swung wide and safe around. And the 4 lengths were 3, up the long pull of the far rise, the rise where she had said to a grave man at a rail, "A sprinter may be made to feel the want of his wind." She asked the colt the smallest question in the world, with the inside of one knee. "Will you?" And Corsair, last of Andromeda's line, foaled in a storm and gentled by a child, and abandoned by every soul on earth since but her, answered the way he had answered her in the gold of the paddock, and again in the heart of the thunder. He went. The 3 lengths became 1. They came up over the brow of the rise into the hard blue, with the bay tiring and emptying under his whip, and the crowd's vast roar changed its note all at once, turning, becoming a thing Eliza had never once in her whole grey life been given and did not know what to do with, and over the brow and down the last long green mile she let the black horse run as he had been foaled to run, as his mother had run before the gaming table, swallowed her whole, and they came home past the post, a clear 2 lengths to the good, with a serving maid lying flat along his streaming neck, and the whole heath of England up on its feet, and screaming her father's vindication into the summer sky. It was not over. Crane made certain of that. She had barely brought the blowing, lathered colt back to a walk, barely slid down into the press of grasping hands and shouting faces, when Sir Hugo Crane came shouldering through the crowd, beautiful and white-lipped with fury, his lazy smiling mask struck clean off at last, and he did the one cruel thing he had left to do, which was to spend her secret in the open air and salt the whole of her win with shame. "A pretty fraud," he cried, and pitched his voice to carry the length of the rope, and the crowd hushed to hear it. "Look at her, the lot of you. This is no horsewoman, this is Hart's daughter, the very get of the thief who robbed the old duke blind and sold off the prize mare. This brute is foaled from theft in the breeding and theft on the back of stolen stock, and Ravensmere's set her on to it before the whole of you. Is this your champion? A horse thief's whelp riding home her father's plunder?" The hush held, 10,000 faces turned, and Eliza Hart, who had spent 7 long years building a wall stone by stone precisely so that this exact moment could never come for her, stood at the head of the horse she loved, in the smoking wreck of her invisibility, and discovered, to her own quiet astonishment, that she was not afraid. The worst thing had come and arrived and broken over her, and she was still standing. There was nothing left to hide, and standing there in the open ruins of her secret, she found that she was, under all of it, under the grey and the lavender and the 7 years, still her father's daughter, and that her father had been an honest man, and that an honest man's daughter need not drop her eyes to a thief. "My father," she said, and her clear voice carried further than Crane's, because she did not have to strain it, was Thomas Hart, horsemaster to the old Duke of Ravensmere, and he was no thief. She did not let go of the colt's rein. He bred the mare Andromeda. He foaled her in the yard at Ravensmere. He gentled her and her son, both with the very arts you have all just watched, run home 2 lengths clear, which I learned at his knee before I was 12, and am not ashamed of before any company in England. And he was turned off without a character, and branded a thief before this same county. To cover the truth, which is that the old Duke himself sold that mare in a single night across a gaming table, to that man's own family. She did not point, she only looked, and 10,000 people followed her look to Sir Hugo Crane, and let an honest servant carry the blame and go into a pauper's grave for it, because a duke's good name was held dearer than a poor man's bread. That is the theft, Sir Hugo. It was done at a table, not in a stable. And you have known it the whole while, for it was your own family bought the mare and paid the silence. This is slander, Crane began, but his beautiful voice had thinned to a reed, and the crowd's mood had already turned against him, the way a crowd will turn all at once, smelling truth on the wind, the way horses smell water. It is not slander, the Duke's voice. He had come through the press to stand at the colt's head beside her, and he turned now, not to her, but to the whole staring county. And he did the thing she had not, until that moment, believed a man like him could ever do. He gave away the last and only thing he had left to keep. It is true. Every word of it is true, and I can prove it, and I have been a coward these 3 years for not proving it sooner. He drew a paper from his breast, old, foxed, soft at the folds with long handling. This is in my own father's hand. I found it among his papers the year I buried him, a note to his man of business, written 3 days before he turned Thomas Hart off, without a character. He held it up into the hard blue light, and read it out, his voice carrying flat and terrible over the silent heath. The grey mare goes to Crane tonight to clear the Newmarket book, and the matter is to be laid at Hart's door, for I'll not have it whispered that a Ravensmere gamed away the best blood in England. See the man dismissed and the story put about. He folded it once, with great care. I have carried this against my heart for 3 years, afraid to publish my own father's dishonour, and so letting an honest man lie disgraced in unhallowed ground, to keep a name that was, it seems, never worth the keeping. I am ashamed of it before all of you. Thomas Hart was the truest servant this house ever had, and I have wronged his memory and his daughter both by my silence, and I correct it now. Here, publicly, on the very ground where the county did him the wrong. He turned to her at last, and his eyes were wet, and he was not ashamed of that either. That is why I would not let Crane speak your name last night, he said, low, only to her now, though 10,000 strained to hear it, and why I tried to sell the horse and send him away from you. Not to be rid of you, Eliza, never that, but because I had not yet found the courage to stand on this ground and say this aloud until the horse forced my hand. I thought silence was a kindness to you. I thought I was carrying you out of the fire on my own back. I have been wrong about silence my whole life, and I was never more wrong than last night. Forgive me, not for the county to hear, for you. The heath was utterly still. Far off and high above them all, unbothered by any of it, the larks went up out of the rough grass and sang, and Eliza understood, all at once and far too late, the half of the conversation she had never heard through that door. That the hard thing he had meant to do, to spare a great many people, had been to take the whole of the shame onto his own shoulders. That he had been trying, clumsily, in the only crippled language his closed grey life had ever taught him, to carry her clear of the fire on his back. That when Crane had named the price of her, and set her on the scale against the horse and the name and the gold, she had not come up wanting at all. She had come up worth the whole of it, worth the last rag of his pride, worth the public ruin of his own father's name and his own. and that he had simply been too long and too cruelly schooled in silence to know that his kindness was the unkindest cut he could have dealt her. "You great fool," she said, and her 7 years' steadiness broke clean across at last, and she did not mind it breaking, here, in front of all the world, where she would never again be invisible and found, to her own astonishment, that she no longer wished to be. "You might have told me one word. You might only have told me. I know it." The Duke took her grazed, dirt-streaked hand in both his own. "I know it. I'm learning. I am a slow pupil, and you are a hard schoolmistress. And I should like, if you'll have me, to spend a great many years being taught." And there before the whole staring county, with Sir Hugo Crane, forgotten, and the colt blowing soft and warm between them and her father's name, washed clean at last under the wide blue sky, the Duke of Ravensmere kept hold of the thief's daughter's hand, and did not let it go. Sir Hugo Crane left the heath within the hour, and the county, which had come out for one farce and been given a far better drama, gave him the cut, direct as he went. A man shown to have bought a stolen mare and let an honest servant carry the blame, for his family's sport finds the doors of 3 counties very suddenly and very quietly shut against him. The notes he held against Ravensmere he tried, out of pure spite, to call in at Michaelmas regardless, but a duke who has won a 1,000-guinea match and the open sympathy of the whole country finds money where a disgraced one cannot, and the matter was settled by the new year, and the bailiffs never came up the drive, and Augusta Crane married a Manchester cotton lord that spring, and was, by every account, perfectly and comfortably content with the bargain she had got. These things Eliza heard, all that long golden autumn, and the soft winter after it, from the warm side of the green baize door. For she did not leave. She had meant to. Her box stayed corded, a full 3 days out of nothing but the long habit of flight. And then the Duke, with great and terrible formality, and his hat actually held in his 2 scarred hands, came to the still-room where the lavender hung drying from the beams, and asked Mrs. Pettifer's leave, of all the souls in England, to pay his addresses to her chambermaid beneath his own roof, which so entirely delighted the old housekeeper that she wept into the drying herbs and had to be revived with a thimble of her own cordial. And Eliza, who had built a wall for 7 years so that no living person might ever see her, and weigh her and find her short, let it down stone by patient stone across that autumn, and was seen at last entirely, and was found, by the one man whose seeing she had come to want, above her own safety, to have been worth the whole of it all along. They were married in the spring, very quietly, in the small grey church at Marbury where Thomas Hart lay, so that he might be near to it, and over his grave the new Duchess of Ravensmere laid not flowers, but a plait of black tail hair from the colt he had foaled, knotted to the old soft cord he had made for her child's hands a lifetime ago, the 2 of them together again at last, and she stood a long while, in the thin April sun, with her hand on the cold stone, and her face was dry, because some joys have gone clean past the country of weeping, and then she went home to her husband and her horse. It is the summer after that, now, and the long evening light lies gold across the bottom paddock the way it did the very first night, the midges hanging in it, the smell of bruised clover coming up warm and sweet off the cut field. The stud is not yet full. Such things take years, and they have years now, the whole wide kind future they bought between them with 1,000 guineas and the truth. But down in the bottom paddock, a bay foal with a white star on his brow, and his grandmother's clean long legs bucks and squeals at his dam's flank, the first of the new line, and along the rail Corsair himself, stands gone glossy and content, and only very occasionally inclined to take the head off a careless groom, lipping at the pocket where the cord still lives. The Duke comes down across the grass in his shirt-sleeves at the day's end, the way he does, and finds his wife sitting bareback on the great black horse in the gold light, with her skirts spilled down his sides, and her face turned up to the last of the warm sun, exactly as he first saw her in a gateway a whole life ago. Only there is no dare in it now, and no fear, and no wall left anywhere in her at all. Lady Carberry, he calls up to her, mock-grave, leaning his folded arms on the warm top rail, would take to her bed for a fortnight, a duchess, bareback, before the very windows of the house. Then let her, says Eliza, and laughs, and reaches her brown hand down to him over the warm black shoulder of the horse, and he takes it, and the great stallion stands quiet as a christened thing beneath them both in the long summer light. Come up behind me, Gabriel. The evening's wide, and the larks aren't down yet. I'll teach you yet.